I remain hopeful, though I will most certainly not have rest until I have my husband safely with me.
If I hadn't been able to come to Britain on the Kindertransport, it's unlikely I'd have survived the Holocaust. So that saved my life.
I miss the camaraderie between us girls. You can never say never with these things.
There are certain people born to a kind of destiny. I think that was going to happen to George in any event.
Shock over a British academic jailed for life for allegedly spying in the United Arab Emirates.
PhD student Matthew Hedges was arrested in May, accused of working on behalf of the UK government.
The Gulf States' Foreign Ministry has said it wants to reach an amicable conclusion after sharp criticism from the Foreign Secretary.
Jeremy Hunt has said he'll do everything in his power to free Matthew Hedges.
I try not to think too much about it because it's quite possibly the hardest 5 minutes of my life. Seeing him shaking and seeing him ask his translator whether he had actually said life in prison was as heartbreaking as it gets. I could see that he couldn't conceive what was going on, and of course not being even able to say goodbye. It was just, yeah, it was the hardest time of my life, and I think I've been through a lot of hard things, but this is most certainly the worst of them all. I hope that they will see it in their hearts that this is a good man with incredible good nature that deserves to be free. But I am disappointed at the fact that the UAE insists that there has been due process, where it evidently failed after 6 months of solitary confinement with no access to legal counsel and very limited access to consular visits. But again, I remain hopeful, though I will most certainly not have rest until I have my husband safely with me.
Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt is already battling to free a British woman, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, in Iran.
Mrs. Zaghari-Ratcliffe's husband has told Sky News his wife is hanging on hopes of what Jeremy Hunt's visit could achieve.
I've been really pleased with how strident the Foreign Secretary has been. He's been really clear that Nazanin shouldn't be in prison, that she should be released, and that it's unacceptable to be holding British citizens as leverage on diplomatic issues. We've waited a long time for someone in the British government to say it that clearly. I'm really pleased he had. She's definitely in a place where this has gone on long enough. I said to his staff, I've said to him, I think we're in a no-nonsense space now. We're just going to be really straightforward, and she's near the end of her tether, and let's try and finish this soon.
Now, at 7:33 in the evening on the 21st of November 1938, so 80 years ago, a debate began in Parliament that was to result in thousands of lives being saved. It led to the creation of the Kindertransport, the evacuation of around 10,000 children, predominantly Jewish, from Nazi Germany to Britain in the final months before the Second World War. Well, the former Labour Minister, Alf Dubs, now Lord Dubs, was a Kindertransport refugee himself and was also behind the Dubs Amendment. That was a 2016 pledge the government has now abandoned to take in 3,000 vulnerable and unaccompanied child refugees from across Europe. I asked him for his thoughts on the Kindertransport scheme, which probably saved his life.
Well, it was a very important occasion. Clearly, if I hadn't been able to come to Britain on a Kindertransport, it's unlikely I'd have survived the Holocaust. So that saved my life. And looking back upon it, it was a momentous occasion, what Britain did. Other countries didn't do it. Britain was pretty well the only country that said, we'll take these children from the clutch of the Nazis, and we lived here, and we had great lives here.
Just a bit more about your circumstances, though, Lord Dubs. I mean, it was children, and there weren't any adults. That's obviously in the name there. What were your personal circumstances?
Well, the circumstances were my father was Jewish, my mother wasn't, and my father said if the Nazis come to Prague, he will leave immediately. He said to his cousins that was his plan. The cousins said, we'll take our chance, and they were taken to Auschwitz in 1942. So my father left. My mother was refused permission to leave. So she got me on a Kindertransport. Before that, I remember quite vividly, in the front page of my school book, I had a picture of President Beneš, the Czech president. I had to tear that out and stick in a picture of Hitler. And that stuck with me in my school book, my one school book. Anyway, so my mother put me on a Kindertransport. I can still, in my mind's eye, see her standing at the station with a friend, German soldiers with swastikas in the background. I was 6, I was one of the youngest, and the train took a couple of days to get to Liverpool Street via the ferry from the Hook of Holland to Harwich.
Astonishing memories, and all kinds of stories, of course, coming out at the moment, including this one. I presume you've been aware about it for a long time. Clement Attlee, Labour leader, of course, later to become Labour Prime Minister, took in himself took in a child who's been talking.
We took a mother and a child, I think. Yes, fantastic story. What a sign of how that man could do something for his fellow human beings. He didn't have to do it, and he did it. And that's great. It's a good story, and it's a lesson to us all.
And you and I have talked over the years, the last few years, about those lessons, particularly when it comes to child refugees, very different conflicts, but unfortunately no shortage of child refugees. And the British attitude now, we've talked in the past about Britain taking in up to a similar number, 10,000 children. Has it happened? Has anything changed?
Well, we've taken a few. Not as many as I would have wished, or as I think Parliament believed at the time of passing an amendment to the Immigration Act. The government put a cap on it anyway, a cap on the numbers arbitrarily. So the numbers are small, and the need is desperate. I've been to refugee camps in northern France. Well, the jungle's gone. I've been to camps in Greece. I've been to Jordan. And indeed, the situation on the Greek islands is pretty awful for young people. It's dangerous, they're vulnerable to sexual abuse, and they're there, and there's very little hope. And to my mind, the most important thing is hope. You can put up with bad conditions if there is hope there, but where there is no hope, it's very hard to continue functioning properly.
It was a crime that shocked Britain. 2-year-old James Bolger was tortured and killed by 10-year-old schoolboys, the youngest killers in more than 250 years. The toddler was snatched from a shopping centre in Merseyside on the 12th of February 1993 by Robert Thompson and John Venables. Now, a short film about the harrowing events and the boy's imprisonment has been released based on real-life interview transcripts. Writer and director Vincent Lamb told me why he decided to look at the case.
I grew up hearing about it. I could never understand how these 2 boys could commit such a horrific crime. And it was years and years later, as an adult, I wanted to know. I wanted to know how it happened. I started reading everything I could find on it. And I felt like I was seeing something that not everyone was seeing with that case. At the same time, I had, a lot of apprehensions about making this case because it's so sensitive. And people still feel so strongly about it. So when I decided to adapt the interviews as a 30-minute drama, I wanted to make sure that it was entirely factual and that there was no embellishments in there whatsoever.
Tell us about the apprehensions. I mean, what were your main concerns?
So, well, I mean, people in the UK, it's something that just divides public opinion, and the public outrage at the time was unprecedented. And it hasn't really gone away, I've found. It still causes outrage today. And I think at the time, I can understand why people, think of those boys as evil. And I grew up always thinking that. But I always thought it was easier to call them evil than to really look into it and to try to understand why that happened. And I think if you look into their family backgrounds, it doesn't explain everything, but it'll kind of give you a little bit more insight into how and why it could have happened. There's nothing new in the film. I think the facts have been there, the transcripts have been there, but it's just a different way of looking at them.
You took James by the hand and led him out to the Strand shops.
We never.
No, not we. Robert is saying that you took him by the hand.
We never.
Not Robert. You did it.
I never.
Well, why would Robert say that about you?
He's a liar. Right, come on, look. You I never took him by the hand. I never even touched the baby.
I don't think John did everything.
Yeah, well, I never.
I think you ate him.
Well, that's what you think.
There's only one person here that knows the whole truth.
I know, and I've just said it all.
Painful to watch, isn't it? What was it like to be the director going through those transcripts?
Well, they're hugely emotional. I mean, which is what I was surprised at when I started looking into it. It wasn't what I expected to find, you know. And then I kind of realized that there was this human story beneath it. From the research I saw, I mean, the interviews were full of emotion. I mean, you see John there where he's up out of his chair, he's hysterical. At one point, he throws himself in the lap of the detectives for comfort. And I think it's a story that just made me look at it from another angle. But at the same time, I've enormous sympathy for the family of James Bolger. And but
Did you speak to James's family?
I didn't, you know, and I think this would probably be, you know, a painful watch for them, because the film, you know, while it's not meant to be sympathetic to the boys in any way, it's not meant to make excuses, but it does humanize them. And I think what the film does, it looks at, you know, the worst of human potential, but still sees humanity there.
Remember this? It's 1994, and Sky News is visiting London's first internet cafe. The World Wide Web is growing fast, spreading new lines of communication and giving anyone, anywhere, a chance to have their say.
It allows anyone to publish their information, and 30 million people can read it.
That 30 million, now an estimated 3.2 billion. And that freedom to publish and read and build what you like has come with consequences. Its creator, Sir Berners-Lee, says it's time for a rethink.
It used not to worry me because I felt that my duty as a web user was just to go and find the stuff which I appreciated, which I trusted. But now I think everybody involved in the web realizes that the problem is that other people go out there, other people are reading stuff which is complete garbage and they're believing it, and they vote. You know, you talk to anybody in the street now about the web and they're not necessarily happy. There's fake news, there's people being manipulated on social networks to vote in particular ways and so on, and the one thing after another, or people being concerned about their privacy. I think there are lots of reasons why we have to step back and think, well, keeping it open and free is important, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all the things that happen on it will be in a constant march towards better science, better knowledge, and better democracy.
Some people look forward to the release of the John Lewis Christmas advertisement. For one man, it does spell some trouble.
Yes, each year, John Lewis, a computer science lecturer from the United States, gets inundated with messages on social media about the ad campaign and about things like returns.
It's a very modern story, this. His own battle to keep up with them all has now inspired Twitter to make him the star of his own Christmas advertisement.
Writing like a stone.
Initially, yeah, it was just a kind of a lark, and then it really snowballed into something much bigger, and the number of tweets increased, and you know, the more I had fun with it, the more I was able to make it bearable, and it just went from there. They get in touch at least once a year, usually around this time, just kind of thanking me for pointing them in the right direction for certain tweets, and yeah, and over the years they've actually sent me some nice kind of Christmas time presents, and it's been a very nice relationship. The folks from Twitter UK got in touch and said they had this idea, and we talked about it a little bit and then just moved forward. And people are asking me now, is that really your house and really your study? And it is. They sent a crew over from the UK here to do the whole filming, and it was a big whirlwind of a day that eventually got broken down into 1 minute of video. So I appreciate a lot more the effort that goes into these kind of things.
Cartoonist Zoom Rockman was just 12 years old when his work was first published in the Beano.
And at 16, he became the youngest cartoonist in Private Eye's magazine history.
Now 18, he's drawn most world leaders, past and present, capturing the lighter side to politics.
I've been drawing ever since I could hold up a pen, but when I was around the age of 8, my family went to a car boot fair and we found a box full of old Beano comics. And I'd never actually seen a comic before, so I'd been drawing for as long as I could remember, and I liked to make up funny stories in my head, but I didn't know that you could put the two together in this medium. And so my parents bought them, and over the next few days I was reading them in my bed. My dad kept having to come into my room and tell me to go to sleep. And then I started drawing Dennis the Menace, Roger the Dodger, and then I decided that I could have a go at doing my own characters. And then eventually, when I produced pages and pages of comic stories, I had enough to put them all together into my own comic.
And at 16, you became the youngest published cartoonist in Private Eye's history. Now, I know for a fact there is a very competitive process to get cartoons into Private Eye. In fact, to get them anywhere these days. So how did that come about?
So, basically, I'd been doing the Beano for 4 years, and I'd noticed that some of the cartoons that I was submitting were a bit too old for their audience. And so I was thinking of new places to go to. And I'd been watching Have I Got News For You for quite a while. And so I knew about Ian Hislop and I knew about Private Eye. And I'm also interested in Peter Cook, who used to edit Private Eye. And so one of my latest comics was based on a Peter Cook and Dudley Moore sketch called What's the Worst Bloody Thing That Could Happen to You?
Yeah, I know the one.
And so I sent that to Ian Hislop with a covering letter saying, how do I get into Private Eye? And then he just sent me a letter back, giving me all the details. And it kind of just went on from there.
Well done, you.
And you've had some quite powerful cartoons in Private Eye, haven't you? One that stands out for me is Big Ben in the Houses of Parliament covered in the cladding in the wake of the Grenfell Tower tragedy. You've now got this exhibition at Simpsons in the Strand, your artist in residence there with your Winston Churchill illustrations. Yesterday, I was saying you had a press breakfast there to launch your exhibition, and then you headed straight off to college and back to reality.
I'm doing the same thing today.
Yeah, so you're here and then you're off to college
Yep.
and you're doing an art foundation
at
course.
Central St Martin's.
What do your contemporaries think of your celebrity status?
It's just a bit surreal and a bit embarrassing for me, actually, as well.
Modest to boot.
Yeah, I was going to say, get used to it.
I miss the camaraderie between us girls, and like being with other people every day is lovely. Like, it's different being on your own. But like now I obviously see the other girls in a different capacity. Like Cheryl's little boy Bear, he's the same age as my youngest, Cole, which is just good planning or luck. We didn't plan it actually, but it's really worked out really well. So now we kind of see each other in that capacity, and they're playing, and we never finish a conversation or a cup of tea anymore, but we still see each other, but we're in a sort of new phase of our lives, which I like actually. You can never say never with these things, because I'm sure at one time the Spice Girls would have been like, no chance. And now it's like, it just feels like the right time for them to reunite. And we haven't actually been apart that long. I think it's the generation of people reuniting, but we've actually not been apart that long. So I feel like maybe we need a few more years for people to actually care whether we come back.
He's in his 80s and is arguably still one of the greatest chat show hosts to grace the UK's television screens. But recently, Sir Michael Parkinson has turned his attention to writing a memoir about his friend George Best. And in his new book, Sir Michael recounts the highs and many lows of the footballer's life through a friend's eyes.
He was a shy lad, so the boy who arrived, the shy kid, was not a thing like the boy was in 2 years' time. This very confident young teenager who understood where he was in the hierarchy of things. I think when George first arrived, because he went straight back home, he was a bit overawed by it all. Because in those days, it was Manchester United, it was Matt Busby, it was all that, it was Bobby Charlton, you know. And it was awesome for a kid from the estate in the Cregan in Belfast. He knew he could play, but he wasn't happy in that situation. But then when he came back later on and was convinced, or became convinced, that he fitted in, he could see exactly where he would fit into this entire scenario, then well, stand by, because, I mean, that's when he first started to become the great player that he is, or was. I think there are certain people born to a kind of destiny. I think that was going to happen to George in any event. There was something within him that was irresistible, the desire to drink, basically, I suppose. He never regarded his life as being a tragedy, you know. I mean, that was the thing about him.
Didn't he?
No, I mean,
once.
people would go in pubs, oh, that was tragic. Don't use that word to me, tragic, you know. I've done this myself. Nobody else, me, I've done that and I've enjoyed it. Thanks, pal, good night. That was George, you see, and he was the most uncomplaining man I've ever met. He never, ever tried to blame other people for his predicament. And I found that totally admirable. That was the most admirable trait I think he had.
I mean, did you ever, as a friend, take him aside and say, George, is there anything more I can do for you? You need some
I think
help.
we all tried. I had a problem because I had my own drink problem as well. After the death of my father, I hit the bottle rather hard, and sometimes with George. So he saw me an extremist, and I wasn't the guy to lecture him about being badly behaved or whatever. On the other hand, I didn't have an illness. I wasn't ill. I was just drinking stupidly, and I stopped. And that was fine from that point on. And George didn't stop, and that was the difference. But no, I never wanted to be in a situation. I'll tell you how we dealt with it. It's very strange. And it was Mary who pointed it out to me. He said, you stopped seeing a lot of George. And I hadn't realised that what she was saying was true. And then I thought, yeah, it's been a while. Then I thought, we're avoiding each other. He didn't want me to see him in extremis. I didn't want to see him drunk out of his mind and falling down. And so that was partly the reason behind the book, that I felt unfinished business, and I felt I didn't go to the funeral. I would love to have spoken at the funeral and all that, and I didn't. And so the book is basically, it's an epistle to a mate,
yeah.
You know, and to all the good times we had together, and to the memories we had, and also to the greatest player I ever saw.